everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Bloomreach's Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable. My name is Michelle, and I'll be hosting our event today. I'm joined by Brian Walker, Chief Strategy Officer at Bloomreach, who will be sharing his insights into the data that you'll all see shortly. Thank you for being here, Brian. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Probably the first time in a long time we both have like somewhat similar systems behind us. So for those of you who have joined us at Commerce Pulse before, thank you and welcome back. For those of you that are joining us here for the first time, Commerce Pulse is a quarterly event that highlights the data we gather here at Bloomreach, where we power e-commerce experiences for hundreds of businesses around the world. Brian helps us put those numbers into context, giving us all a better understanding of the state of commerce today and what we can expect going forward. Today, we will be looking at data from the first quarter of 2023, and we'll break that down into a few different sections. We'll do a general overview, a look into B2C, a brief look into B2B. Then we'll talk through some shifts we're seeing in consumer behavior, and we'll follow that with predictions for the summer months ahead. So with that being said, let's get started. We'll talk through some of our overall e-commerce results for the quarter. All right, so taking a look at month over month, so the last full month of the quarter of March versus the February prior, we saw nice increases in sales in North America of a little over 18% and increases in traffic, conversion rate, and average order size as well. In the UK and EU, we saw sales down just under 9% and then declines in traffic, conversion rate, and average order size as well. If we move along, we will take a look at Q1 of 2023 versus Q1 of 2022. Bit of a different story here. In North America, we saw declines in sales of almost 13%, traffic and conversion rate down, both almost about 10%, and then an increase in average order size of about 7%. In the UK and EU, we saw increases around 15% in sales, and then increases in traffic, conversion rate, and average order size as well. So let's kick it off, Brian. What should we be thinking about those numbers?
Pretty interesting, the difference between just looking at March over February and obviously year over year. If we kind of zoom in on North America, I think we have to realize that, the month over month numbers look really strong, but obviously the quarter as a whole got off to a really challenging start in terms of online retail and B2C. And really that's a combination of factors. Excuse my voice. A combination of factors. The number one, kind of a shift to services and travel. People now post-pandemic, and trust me, having been to a few conferences in Q1 and even more recently, the pandemic in North America certainly is more than over. I think that's probably true across Europe as well. People are really kind of eager and excited to kind of get back to traveling. There's a lot of events. Wedding season is coming up. I think it's going to be probably a record wedding season. Even
personally, yes.
And people, traveling, including myself. My family, we went to Southern California for almost a month and a half during Q1. And so a shift to restaurants, dining out, entertainment, and travel obviously impacted consumption in goods. And that's reflected, I think, in the Q1 numbers. Also, we need to realize that the banking crisis that certainly weighed on people's minds very heavily impacted overall retail spending as well. Retail sales overall in the US in the first quarter, early indications, although we don't have the final numbers from the Census Bureau, show that overall retail was actually down pretty significantly in Q1. So obviously, the online retail is not isolated in any respect from that. We also see, ongoing consumer concerns about the economy. Lots of news around layoffs and certainly inflation weighing on people's minds. Access to credit. Consumer credit is now approaching an all-time high. as people, no longer are using, the stimulus from the pandemic. They're instead dipping into credit or savings in order to fuel their lifestyle. So lots of factors there weighing on the North American numbers. I think in Europe, it's a little bit different. While the economy in Europe overall is pretty healthy, we did see a pretty significant dip in the month-over-month numbers. That's obviously lots of different factors can play into that, including weather and other things. So it's just an interesting indicator. If we look at the overall Q1 numbers, we have to realize that we're kind of annualizing a pretty difficult Q1 in 2022 with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, really having a significant impact on European and UK spending. And certainly energy prices and a number of other things continue to weigh on consumers in the Europe and UK, where inflation also remains very high in the UK, running at about 10% annualized rate. So that's a heavy load for consumers to carry, spending much more percentage of their income on housing and energy, and obviously their dollar's not going quite as far. And when we dig into some of the sector numbers, we'll see that it is still a little bit variable when you look at the different sectors, but certainly inflation is kind of a narrative that we see throughout, impacting average order size in a positive way, but not necessarily reflecting an overall healthy environment for online retail and for consumers.
I think that's a great way to segue into those sectors. So we can talk about that a little bit more in detail. So let's pull up that data and we'll start talking through some of the different B2C numbers. So if we take a look at apparel, sales were down about 21% in March year over year, down about 14% in Q1. Shocking to me based on my own credit card bill. Traffic down in March and in Q1 year over year. Conversion rate down in March as well as in Q1. And again, average order size down in March as well as in Q1. We go to our next sector in grocery. Sales were down almost 7% in March year over year, down about 12% in Q1. Traffic was up just a bit in March and in Q1. Conversion rates down in March and Q1, and then average order size up about 3% in March and down just a bit in Q1. Next, we have luxury, and I think these are maybe the softest numbers that I've seen since we've started doing Commerce Pulse and talking about luxury. Sales were up just about 5% in March year over year and just up marginally in Q1. Traffic was down almost 12% in March year over year, down about 11% in Q1. Conversion rates down in both March and in Q1. And then average order size up about 20% in both March and in Q1. And then finally, looking at home furnishings and home improvement, starting with home furnishings, declines in sales and traffic in the first quarter, conversion rate up about 9% in Q1, and then average order size down about 4% in Q1. And then home improvement, we saw declines in both sales, traffic, pretty substantial decline in conversion rate, almost 60% in Q1. And then on the flip side, average order size up almost 65% in Q1. So let's start maybe with apparel, Brian. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very tough quarter. There's no way of sort of sugarcoating it for apparel. I think, many apparel brands and retailers left 2022 Q4 with excess inventory. It was a very promotional period. And that's reflected obviously in the sales number. And it's also the only category where we actually saw average order size down significantly, while conversion rate sort of remained relatively stable. So in apparel, I think it's a story of lots of promotional and sales activity, which again impacts the actual funds going through the so-called register, if you will, what you're actually recording. Obviously, also impacts average order size, while consumers are really hunting for items on sale, and in a sense are kind of back into a pre-pandemic pattern of really looking for things on sale, and even maybe gamifying it a little bit I know a lot of consumers talk to me about that. I'm not someone who's as patient as as maybe others are, but are looking for that 25, 30% discount on top of sometimes items that are on sale. Certainly, there are certain categories within apparel that continue to perform reasonably well, but overall remains a pretty challenged category as we look to enter the summer and back to school season soon. So maybe it's a process of flushing out some old inventory. Some of the apparel brands and retailers also were sitting on product that was stalled in the supply chain. And we're looking to flush that out. So again, promotional activity, but also those styles may just not be as fresh as what consumers are looking for. And we also have to understand the impact of things like fast fashion and the dramatic rise of offshore retailers essentially skipping the supply chain online. I'm talking about businesses such as Shine, I think having an impact as well. And that's something that apparel businesses in particular are going to have to respond to as the trends just really amplify and speed up. Obviously fed in many ways by social media and just the pace of the culture. And so those are all things that I think are weighing on and impacting apparel online.
Yeah. Maybe I was going to go into grocery, but just kind of staying on this trend, you want to talk a bit about luxury and what we're seeing there?
Well, luxury has been the category that's been, as you said, a bit of a surprise, right? It's been performing really, really well through 2022. We saw, month on month, quarter on quarter growth in luxury that was, I think, reflective of the kind of imbalance in the economy in some ways, and also I think kind of a post-pandemic bump as people look to refresh their wardrobes with things they could wear to events and cultural events and weddings and so on. It still performed better than most of the other categories in Q1, and we see a pretty dramatic jump in average order size. So things are not on sale, right? And luxury retailers feel they can get more margin by selling full price and raising prices. So we see that. Conversion rate was negatively impacted in some ways by that, but sales overall held. Now, if we look at it from an inflation kind of perspective, it's roughly flat, but still luxury remains a strong category. But when we look at consumer sentiment, it's kind of interesting. In Q1, we saw kind of a shift in consumer sentiment where it's actually the higher income brackets have their consumer confidence has actually decreased faster than any other, whereas lower income consumers' confidence actually recovered in Q1. So we sort of see this asymmetry, and I think that's reflected in things like the banking crisis, the equity markets, bond prices, real estate, all these things weighing on the confidence of higher income consumers, whereas overall employment numbers remain relatively strong. Unemployment obviously still toward a very low level. So lower income consumers may feel more confident than they did in the past. So we see this sort of, again, sort of asymmetry. It's a very turbulent sort of environment. And I think that luxury continues to perform well when we look at it from a year over year perspective, but that's interesting. It's the first quarter we've seen in a long time where it's relatively flat.
Yeah, really interesting. Any thoughts on home improvement, home furnishings?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see again the numbers there. I think home furnishings is obviously tied very much to people moving. Certainly early in the pandemic, people were investing a lot, obviously, and probably many people listening here did the same, right? Upgrading their kitchens, upgrading furniture, setting up home office environments, investing in outdoor furniture. We don't necessarily need to refresh those things frequently. And so traditionally, home improvement was often tied to the housing sector, people moving, relocating, and needing to, change their furnishings, et cetera, kind of to reflect that. And the housing market is kind of stalled, again, related to interest rates principally. Housing inventories are at a very low level right now. And the rental market is also kind of stalled a bit. And so that's reflected, I think, in the home furnishings number. Home improvement, actually, sales only down 5%, is actually a pretty interesting number, because this reflects, again, a huge amount of growth that we had in a category like that online during the pandemic, and it's remained relatively stable. We haven't really seen a backtrack toward offline, going to the lumber yard, going to the hardware store. We're still using the online channels. And it's also important to realize that, this is baked into these numbers is things like curbside pickup and buy online, pickup in store type behaviors. And we have to realize that there's still a lot of research going on through your online channels. So even if you're seeing a dip or kind of a plateau in your online sales, that does not mean consumers are not actively looking. And we can see that reflected in a conversion rate significant drop in a category like home improvement. I mean, that's a big number, 58% drop. I mean, makes us really want to interrogate and make sure that our numbers are accurate. But it also reflects consumers doing online research before they make a journey into a store. So it's important to think about your online channel as driving demand across the entire business if you're an omni-channel business, even if the conversion may be happening in another channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's round it out with grocery. What did we see in those numbers?
Just bringing up the numbers to refresh my memory.
You don't have it memorized?
Yeah. Grocery, again, is a category that had, of course, tremendous growth during the pandemic out of necessity. The online grocery numbers in Q1 really did soften pretty dramatically. And that's an interesting indicator that consumers are changing some of their purchasing behavior. It also is an indicator, again, of dining out and consumers getting back to that, whether it's fine dining or even fast food. And certainly we don't track in these numbers delivery of restaurant prepared meals. This is really core grocery. So I think in the grocery numbers in Q1, they were pretty soft relative to what we've seen. We saw a really nice kind of solid plateau and with some incremental growth in online grocery toward the second half of last year, showing a real stability in online grocery behavior. Q1, it softened. And certainly what's weighing on consumers, which we spoke about earlier, paired with many consumers spending outside the home, has really, I think, impacted grocery in Q1. It'll be a very interesting space to watch. And we see that average order size, remained relatively stable, which is interesting to me because it shows that maybe grocers don't feel they can be raising prices as fast as they would want to, based on inflationary pressure. So very interesting to see this in Q1 in that category, and we'll have to keep a close eye on grocery as it moves forward into Q2.
Do you feel it's at all impacted by, during and coming out of the pandemic, I know that there was a very big focus from the grocers themselves on their online experiences. Do you feel that focus is still there, or that it's maybe dropped off a bit as things have normalized? Has that had any impact?
I think it has dropped off. I think many grocers are kind of doing a bit of a pivot. They're shifting up their mix of service providers and partners to support delivery, for example. We see a lot of movement on that in the marketplace, and certainly the operational focus inside grocers is to get consumers back in the store. May not agree with that necessarily, but it's certainly, I think we've seen a lot of grocers kind of take a bit of a pause, which is frankly a bit of a concern, because this is a long-term trend. And if you can build that infrastructure and operational strength to serve an omni-channel customer directly, you're going to benefit. But grocers are operating on thin margins. They're trying to be very pragmatic.
Yeah. Be interesting to see what that looks like next quarter. All right, let's wrap up B2C now and take a look into some B2B numbers for the quarter. All right, taking a look at sales in March, up over 46% in March year over year, down about 15% in Q1. Traffic was up almost 14% in March year over year and down slightly in Q1. In conversion rates, we saw them up in March, down over 10% in the first quarter. And then average order size up pretty substantially in March, over almost 22%, and then down just a bit in Q1. Yeah, thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, early in Q1, we did see a pretty dramatic dip in B2B online activity. And I think that's just reflective of kind of turning over the fiscal year for a lot of businesses, and probably a conservativism that kind of set in the business cycle. A lot of concern over spending. You saw, that reflected in, large profile layoffs, concerns around interest rates, what the Federal Reserve in the US was doing, and all of these different factors. And in the many businesses, there was sort of a conservatism that kind of set in. What's interesting is to see that the economy overall, though, remains quite healthy. And so there in March, you saw a pretty dramatic improvement month over month. So on balance, not a good quarter, but kind of reflects maybe a good trend as we enter into Q2. It is interesting to see that conversion rates were down. I think that's an indicator that businesses really need to look at their experiences and make sure that their B2B buyers and customers are well supported. We shouldn't see a dip like that. It may reflect some price checking going on in the B2B market. Obviously, it's much easier now than it used to be to quickly price check different suppliers. So that may be reflected, but I think it also is important that businesses really look at their conversion funnels and their site experience and make sure that customers are able to find products quickly and obviously purchase them in a frictionless way for their business. Average order size remained pretty stable for B2B, which is interesting. It means that inflationary pressure we keep talking about probably is impacting B2B margins, certainly for businesses that are selling predominantly online, which now in B2B, roughly 65% of business is being done through online channels. So, it's really, we've seen that dramatic shift, obviously exiting the pandemic. So that's an overall indicator that margins are probably being negatively impacted as B2B merchants are not passing on some of that inflationary pressure to their B2B customers.
For anyone who's looking for more B2B insights, I know we don't spend a ton of time on that in Commerce Pulse, but Jason Hine from the Bloomreach team, I've never known someone so passionate and so knowledgeable about B2B. So follow him on LinkedIn.
That's a great point. It would be a terrific opportunity for people to engage with Jason and get some insights.
Absolutely. Excuse me. So we would usually at this point shift to our predictions, but before we get there, I think that you have some slides to share on consumer trends and how we're seeing some customer behavior change.
Yeah. So I pulled some data from a partner of ours, Content Square, to just kind of reflect a couple things that I think are just important for us to be thinking about. And this is really interesting. Session depth, time spent, and scroll rate. These are all indicators of how engaged consumers are and how successful they are at navigating and finding what they're looking for on a site. And this data reflects a very large sample size of online retail behavior. And it's an indicator that there's work to be done, that consumers are frustrated. You can see that all of these metrics are down year over year. And this is again a concern. And there's lots of different factors within your site experience that could be impacting these things. So Session depth is really how deep a customer is going on your site. You can see the desktop fell almost 4%. Time spent down kind of across the board, but mobile in particular down almost 9%. And then scroll rate, how likely is a customer to really digest a whole page, down as well. And these are indicators that there's challenges within the user experience and there's work to be done to make sure that you're serving the customer effectively through your digital channels. And obviously, every business is going to have a somewhat different set of things probably to work on. But the principles are going to be, product discovery, checkout, navigation. Those are areas that are obviously going to impact this, as well as how compelling your content and your site experience and product assortment are, and how you're presenting it. So just an early indicator, something that I think really jumped out when I saw this data, that all of these metrics are down, and in particular, time spent down pretty significantly in mobile, I think is an interesting indicator.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and move on. Here on the right-hand side of the slide, it just reflects the, by different segments, the percentage of your traffic now that is mobile. I think we all probably are aware of that to some degree, but now we've, in many cases, actually predominantly mobile traffic versus desktop traffic. So you've got to be focused on your mobile experience. I know that's something we've been talking about for a number of years, but certain categories like fashion, health and beauty, luxury, where, it's well over 50% now. And there are still plenty of mobile experiences that need help and need work. And certainly recognizing the obvious, right, that the form factor is so compact. And the ways in which we're used to interacting through mobile devices means that first set of product results on a category page or a search result matter tremendously. How compelling the content is that I see right off the bat matters, of course, tremendously. And then on the left-hand side, just a reminder, right? We spend so much time in the past and still today, many really thinking about their paid channels. We need to realize that the unpaid channels, things like email, SMS, and SEO, are really the predominant drivers of your business, and paying attention to those channels and really driving repeat visit and repeat purchase from customers through your direct channels is really the key driver to growth. And the percentage of traffic in certain categories from paid, are pretty low relative to the budget that many organizations are applying. So it's something just to be cognizant of and be thinking about when you're kind of looking at and examining where you're spending your time, resources, and budget. And so that also kind of jumped off the page to me.
Yeah.
Let's go to the last slide. So here again, we talked a little bit about frustration. The frustration factor. There's a lot of different things that can go into this. The way Content Squared would track this is like when a customer clicks the same button multiple times, or is refreshing, or is engaging the site in a way that indicates that they're frustrated. And it's things like slow page load times. And, I love this term rage clicks. It's like, it's not working for me as fast as I want it to. So site performance, usability are really key factors. And for many businesses, they may feel like they're not able to move as fast as they would like in terms of updating and modernizing their experience. Testing and optimization are often a challenge, depending on the platform and the environment, the tech stack that you're working in, and that's a reality. But these are all kind of early indicators that we've got work to be done in the market. And even though we're 25 years into online retail, roughly, I'm sure someone out there will correct my number. It's a long time. And many of the techniques and many of the approaches have been dramatically refined. There's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that your users are well supported, that it's a frictionless experience, that the customer is not rage clicking, and that they're finding what they need. And of course, principally now that's dominated by mobile, depending on your vertical. If you're a B2B distributor, most of your customers are probably still on desktop. But if you're in a fashion brand or retailer, most of your traffic now is mobile. So you really got to think about the use cases and how customers are engaging. It's almost more important, I think, to focus on those kind of metrics than things like conversion rate, because again, conversion rate reflects how many consumers are converting through your online experience. Yes, we want to see that that be a very healthy number. 3, 4, 5% would be terrific. But the reality is, the omni-channel customer now is doing a lot of online research. They may be converting in other channels or even through other retailers purchasing your product if you're a wholesale brand with a direct channel. And that's okay, right? That's okay. So obsessing about a conversion rate number sometimes you can kind of miss the big picture. But things like rage clicks and usability and some of those other metrics are indicators, again, that there's a lot of work to be done. So I thought it would just be interesting to share some of that data from one of our partners and kind of reflect on that as we look at the overall health of online retail.
Yeah, that's great. Rage clicks is a very apt term. While we're on this topic of the customer, I want to just do one quick question on everyone's favorite topic right now, which is AI. I know you've been speaking quite a bit in your newsletter about ChatGPT and the impacts on commerce and on commerce teams. So I'm just kind of curious, at a high level, how do you see generative AI really impacting commerce and how consumers are thinking about online shopping?
Well, I think there's a short term and longer term answer to that. And when we talk about generative AI, most people are thinking about ChatGPT. But the reality is it's the underlying sort of technology around large language models and what that's enabling. Today, we're still very early. And these large sort of almost consumer facing type applications like ChatGPT can be very useful for things like brainstorming, useful for things like outlines. Yes, a lot of online retailers are already using it to generate product descriptions and email copy. And we've integrated ChatGPT, OpenAI's capability, into our marketing tools to make it easy for a marketer to facilitate that ideation, right? And there are some benefits because creating variations and versions to test and to personalize against has always been a challenge for organizations that are stretched. So you already see marketers and merchants using it. Yes, there are some concerns around intellectual property and many brands are concerned about that, and that's a legitimate concern. So this should be a tool that people use who then would, in a sense, edit and put the final polish on any content that they're using those kind of tools for. So today, generative AI is kind of a back office tool, and it's often not particularly well integrated, although, as I mentioned, we've integrated it into our marketing tools. Many marketers and merchants are probably kind of using it on the side. There are some clever ways you can automate leveraging those tools. And there's a lot of people out there who are kind of exploring that. What I've been writing a lot about is the longer term implications of this kind of technology on the user experience, how consumers may expect to engage in product research and in search and other things. And they're going to get very used to very quickly having a well digested and well formulated response to a question, and not have to go hunting and pecking and sorting through a bunch of links and taking time to do that. And so we're going to see a real transition, I think, in terms of how customers think about searching and engaging through these digital channels. even something as simple as a search. And businesses are going to need to think about the paradigms that we've been using now, again, for over 25 years, really starting to change and shift. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it may happen over a couple of years. And so it's something to really keep a close eye on. There's other channels that you could imagine becoming really interesting and compelling for a customer, again, as their expectations change and transition. Something like shopping via an interactive television that I can talk to before seemed kind of silly and didn't work particularly well, right? But voice-enabled remotes and smart TVs are commonplace. And something like generative AI enables me to have a conversation. We've got stuff in our lab at Bloomreach that is looking at this, and we're going to be working with some early adopter customers to explore how voice interfaces through web experiences or maybe channels like a smart television app could really change. And I can imagine a customer very easily interacting in a shopping experience on their couch in their PJs, and finding that actually now becomes pretty compelling, because not only can we do natural language processing, but we can use personalization techniques, and the content can even be somewhat adapted on the fly. Again, we're not quite there yet, but these models and the technology is starting to enable this. And so sorting through and searching for and comparing products through an interface like that suddenly becomes quite plausible and potentially very interesting for a customer. Now, easy to predict something like that. Customers are always going to vote with their clicks, or in this case, voices and so on. But we may see some early trials of that. We may learn a lot, and it may evolve. But I think generative AI is both going to have a pretty dramatic impact on how customers expect to engage, how they also expect to potentially engage in a physical store environment. Sales associates already struggle in a store with customers sometimes being smarter than they are about the products because they've done so much online research. Now they might come in and say, I'm having a better experience engaging this online or TV-based type experience backed by this technology that to the customer is just feels very natural to them suddenly. And somewhat effortless. Whereas in an in-store environment, it's not the same. And so you may see some of this kind of technology also migrate either in support of associates or in support of a store-based experience, and the role of the associate in the store could easily change. So anyway, my point is it's very early, and I think we see a lot of merchants and marketers engaging with these tools today in a way to kind of support their business process. Those are going to improve dramatically. We'll see vertical applications developing relatively rapidly. Also, being able to apply that to your proprietary data and content. So it's not just general the way it is today with ChatGPT, where it's a synthesis of the whole internet, right? It'll be a synthesis of what you care about. And then, as I said earlier already, the customer experience is likely to evolve quite a bit. So again, very early, but clearly a space to watch. We're planning a large retail AI summit in August. I would encourage anyone who's interested in exploring how these things how generative AI and large language models will impact online retail, on digital marketing, to consider attending. We'll have information we can share about that very, very soon. I think the site is live, so we should get a link out to people, and I'd encourage people to check that out. We're obviously going to do a lot of demonstration and a lot of conversation, I think is the best way to put it. This isn't about anyone telling anyone else what's going to happen. It's about exploring that as a community.
Yeah, that's theedgesummit.com if anyone wants to check that out. But it's going to be fascinating to look back at this video 10 years from now, and I think it will either seem as if we're talking about the internet or we're talking about flying cars, where it's,
Now,
you know what I mean? There's
well,
kind of,
having been in this industry a very long time, there's been lots of different things that we thought were going to have a pretty dramatic impact. We thought 3D printing was going to have a pretty dramatic impact on personalized product and supply chain and on-demand kind of endless inventory. Didn't quite materialize. I think it still may, but it hasn't materialized yet. Some of that has to do with costs and materials and manufacturing. Obviously, 3D printing is huge in many different parts of the manufacturing community, but hasn't really impacted consumers directly yet in how we think about interacting with businesses. It's easy to maybe put generative AI in the same category as the metaverse or crypto or these other major trends that captivated a lot of the media and occupied a lot of dinner party conversations over the last number of years. But I do think generative AI is different, and I think there's so many different ways I think it will affect how consumers expect to engage, and obviously help merchants and marketers do more and do it faster. And of course, personalization, as I mentioned, is one area where we've been working on optimizations around personalization for many years. But one of the big barriers is not the machine learning algorithms and driving that. We of course, at Bloomreach, spend a lot of our energy helping customers drive personalization. What's one of the biggest barriers to personalizing a site experience? It's content. It's content. And creating multiple mini variations of content in the past that could be targeted at small segments or down into micro segments that you could sort of claim as one-to-one, that was a huge barrier in the past. That barrier just eroded. We haven't yet gotten to the point where it's really easy or frictionless to do that, or that we can do it in a way that is brand appropriate and really reflects the lifestyle that a brand or retailer is looking to convey. But that will change, I believe, relatively soon. So that's why I think generative AI actually will have a pretty significant impact. And that I was a metaverse skeptic from the very early days. Sometimes was doing the counter narrative on press interviews and everything else. But I think generative AI is different, and I am quite bullish about it, which is why I mentioned the AI Summit. I think I would encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, incredibly exciting. All right, so AI notwithstanding, let's wrap this up with some e-commerce predictions for the months to come. What are you seeing for the next few months ahead?
Well, I think it's going to be a soft Q2. Honestly, I think the economy remains very turbulent in terms of what to take away. Consumer confidence remains quite low, and we see spending on travel and services. Many airlines are reporting that their summer travel schedules are almost full. Consumers are out there going on vacation, taking trips, going to weddings, all these kind of things. And so that will also impact retail, not only online retail, but retail overall. I think it's going to be a bit of a soft quarter. Economy and customer behavior, not related to like online versus retail, but just overall. So I think the quarter will be a bit soft. And we don't really have any major things in Q2 that really drive consumer spending. I do think that in the fall, my expectation is we see a nice recovery with back to school, and we are seeing a renewed focus on getting people back into office environments, et cetera. And that's going to play out, I think, through the summer. But in the fall, expect consumers to really be, so categories like apparel, categories like luxury, I think are going to have a strong fall. But Q2, I think, will be a bit of a challenge and a bit soft. And I think we see a lot of macroeconomic signals that are not super clear, but that leads to uncertainty, and uncertainty leads to caution. And that paired with consumers spending on dining out and travel will impact overall retail and online retail as a result.
Well, we will look forward to seeing how these next few months pan out.
See how wrong I am. Yeah.
You've been pretty on point for the past few quarters, so I think we can feel good about that prediction. All right, yeah, so you can learn more in our next Commerce Pulse Quarterly, which is going to take place this summer, which will be here before we know it. And in the meantime, everyone here can check out the Commerce Experience podcast hosted by Brian here for some additional insights into the world of commerce and the trends impacting it. And you can also find Brian both on LinkedIn or through his newsletter, Cocktails, Commerce, and Conversions. This is when I spoke about him talking a lot about ChatGPT. That's where that came from. So check that out and subscribe. And I think that's it. With that, we'll close out. Thank you, Brian. Oh, one more.
I just want to say, yeah, people are probably like, cocktails? What? Yeah, I'm pairing my industry analysis with mixology, cocktails, mocktails, and so on. It's a personal passion of mine. So it's a little gift. With every newsletter, you get some background history and a recipe. But I have been writing a lot about generative AI there. I also did a big piece on why I think we've reached peak Amazon. So if you're curious and interested, please do check it out. Please do subscribe. It's free. And it's a way for me to share out my perspective. They are long reads, so that's why I share a cocktail with them. So you can have a cocktail while you spend 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how fast you read. Anyway, just a small little plug there.
That's a good balance. I think all newsletters should come with a cocktail. All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today, and we'll see you again next quarter.
Thank you, everyone.